Vivian Hart pressed her fingers against her throbbing temples as she sat alone at the marble bar of the Grandview Hotel, nursing a glass of wine she barely tasted. The crystal chandeliers above cast dancing shadows across her tired features, reflecting the exhaustion of someone who had just endured a 3-hour conference call while driving through a snowstorm to reach this godforsaken winter resort. Her phone buzzed for the 15th time that evening. Another text from her mother. Another reminder that her younger sister Penelope's Christmas Eve wedding was in 4 days, and that Vivian was, once again, arriving without a date. The message included a helpful update that her ex-boyfriend Julian would be there as the best man, accompanied by his new girlfriend. Naturally. Could this get any worse? Vivian muttered, taking a larger sip of wine than intended. Usually, when someone asks that question aloud, the universe takes it as a personal challenge, came a smooth, amused voice from beside her. Vivian turned to find a man settling onto the bar stool next to hers. Despite the entire bar being nearly empty, he was infuriatingly handsome in that effortless way that some men possessed, with dark hair that looked expertly tousled, sharp cheekbones, and eyes the color of aged whiskey. His charcoal suit probably cost more than her monthly mortgage payment. Dominic Ashford. He introduced himself, extending a hand. His grip was warm and confident. And before you ask, yes, I'm aware that sitting next to a stranger in an empty bar makes me look either desperately lonely or dangerously forward. Vivian Hart, she replied, finding herself smiling despite her foul mood. And I'm going with desperately lonely, since dangerously forward usually comes with worse cologne. Dominic laughed, a genuine sound that made something in her chest loosen slightly. Fair assessment. Though I prefer strategically positioned, I'm actually hiding from my ex-fiancée, who just checked into this hotel with her new husband. They're attending the same wedding I'm contractually obligated to attend this weekend. I'm the venture capital partner who funded the groom's startup, so my absence would be professionally catastrophic. Vivian's eyes widened. The Hammond Sterling wedding. You're not Penelope's sister. Vivian finished, a slightly hysterical laugh escaping her. Which makes you the infamous investor everyone's been talking about. My sister mentioned that her fiancé's business partner was bringing a mysterious +1 who backed out last minute. They stared at each other for a long moment, and Vivian could almost see the same wild idea forming in both their minds simultaneously. This is insane, Vivian said slowly. Completely, Dominic agreed, his eyes glinting with dangerous possibility. But hear me out. You need a date to avoid pitying looks and conversations with your ex. I need someone to help me avoid the woman who left me at the altar 2 years ago. We're both professionals. We're both desperate. And we're both already attending the same wedding. You're suggesting we fake a relationship for 4 days. I'm suggesting a mutually beneficial arrangement. We establish clear boundaries, maintain appropriate professional distance, and part ways on Christmas morning with no complications. Think of it as a business transaction. Vivian's rational architectural mind was screaming warnings about structural instability and foundation cracks. But her tired, wine-softened heart was whispering something different. She thought of Julian's smug face, her mother's concerned questions, and the exhausting performance of pretending her career success filled all the empty spaces in her life. Rules, she stated firmly, pulling out her phone. If we're doing this, we need actual rules. I'm an architect. I don't build anything without a blueprint. Dominic smiled, pulling out his own phone. I'm a venture capitalist. I don't invest in anything without terms and conditions. For the next hour, they sat at that bar crafting the most unusual contract either had ever created. No romantic involvement. No personal questions about past relationships. Public displays of affection limited to hand-holding and occasional arm-touching. The arrangement would terminate precisely at midnight on Christmas Day. They would create a backstory. They met at a charity gala 3 months ago, bonded over their shared love of architecture and sustainable investment, and had been dating quietly ever since. One more thing, Dominic said, as they prepared to finalize their agreement. We should probably practice. Practice what? Looking like we're actually in love. Your family will see through this in seconds if we're awkward." Before Vivian could protest, Dominic shifted closer, his hand coming to rest lightly on her waist. The touch was professional, calculated, and yet it sent an unexpected warmth through her entire body. He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch, his eyes soft and focused entirely on her face. "Like this," he murmured. "When I look at you, I need to look like you're the only person in the room." Vivian's heart hammered against her ribs. "And what do I do?" "You smile like you have a secret, like you know something about me that no one else does," she tried, finding it surprisingly easy to smile when he was looking at her like that. "How's this?" "Perfect," Dominic said, his voice slightly rougher than before. He cleared his throat and stepped back, breaking the spell. "We should probably get some rest. Big performance starts tomorrow at the welcome brunch." As Vivian rode the elevator to her room, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just made either the best or worst decision of her life. The rational part of her brain was already calculating risk factors and potential complications, but a smaller, quieter part, the part she usually ignored in favor of spreadsheets and blueprints, was whispering something different. Maybe, just maybe, this Christmas wouldn't be a complete disaster after all. She looked down at her phone, at the digital contract they'd both signed, and noticed Dominic had added one final clause she hadn't seen him type. Both parties agree that if real feelings develop, they will be brave enough to admit it. Vivian smiled despite herself, her finger hovering over the delete button. After a moment's hesitation, she left it there, shut off her phone, and tried to convince herself that 4 days of pretending was all this would ever be. The snow falling outside her window looked almost magical in the lamplight, and for the first time in months, Vivian fell asleep with something that felt dangerously close to hope blooming in her chest. The welcome brunch was held in the resort's grand conservatory, a stunning glass structure that overlooked snow-covered mountains. Vivian adjusted the emerald cashmere sweater she'd chosen specifically because her mother always said it had brought out her eyes, and took a deep breath before entering with Dominic's hand warm against the small of her back. "Ready for this?" he murmured close to her ear, his breath sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, forcing confidence into her voice. The moment they stepped through the doors, her mother's eyes locked onto them like a heat-seeking missile. Margaret Hart was a force of nature wrapped in pearls and cashmere, and she descended upon them with the speed of someone who had been waiting 29 years for this exact moment. "Vivian, you didn't tell me you were bringing someone." Her mother's voice carried across the conservatory, causing several heads to turn. "And who is this handsome young man?" "Mom, this is Dominic Ashford." "Dominic, my mother, Margaret Hart." Vivian felt Dominic's hand tighten reassuringly on her waist. "Mrs. Hart, it's a pleasure," Dominic said, extending his hand with a warmth that seemed genuinely natural. "Vivian has told me so much about you. Your daughter inherited your excellent taste. She mentioned you're the one who taught her to appreciate classical architecture." Vivian blinked in surprise. She had never told him that, but somehow he'd made it sound entirely believable. Her mother practically glowed. "Oh, he's charming, Vivian. Don't let this one go." Margaret patted Dominic's arm before sweeping away to inform everyone within earshot that her eldest daughter had finally brought a boyfriend to a family event. "Classical architecture," Vivian whispered as they made their way to the buffet table. "Lucky guess. You have a vintage drafting compass tattoo on your wrist." Women who get tattoos of old instruments usually have a sentimental reason. Dominic's observant comment caught her off guard. Before she could respond, a familiar voice called out from across the room. "Vivian Hart, I didn't think you'd actually show up." Julian Blackwood approached with his girlfriend Rachel clinging to his arm, wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He looked exactly as Vivian remembered, conventionally attractive, impeccably dressed, and radiating the self-satisfaction of someone who believed the world revolved around his convenience. "Julian," Vivian's voice came out cooler than she intended. "Of course I'm here. It's my sister's wedding. And you brought someone. How unexpected." Julian's gaze shifted to Dominic, with barely concealed assessment. Julian Blackwood, old friend of the bride's sister. Dominic Ashford, current boyfriend of the bride's sister. Dominic's tone was pleasant, but there was steel underneath. He extended his hand, and Vivian noticed with satisfaction that his handshake made Julian wince slightly. Vivian mentioned you'd be here. She said you were the one who broke up with her via text message because commitment scared you, right? The conservatory seemed to go quiet. Julian's face reddened, while Rachel looked between them with wide eyes. That's not exactly how Julian began. Oh, I must have misremembered, Dominic continued smoothly, his arm sliding around Vivian's waist and pulling her closer. Either way, I should thank you. Your loss was definitely my gain. He looked down at Vivian with such genuine warmth that for a moment, she forgot they were acting. Her heart stuttered in her chest, and she found herself leaning into his embrace naturally. Julian mumbled something about getting drinks and retreated with Rachel in tow. The moment they were gone, Vivian let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. That was incredibly satisfying. Dominic finished, grinning. I may have overstepped with the text message comment, but his face was worth it. How did you know about the text? I didn't, but men like him always take the coward's way out. It was a calculated guess. He paused, his expression softening. Did I embarrass you? No, Vivian admitted, surprised to find she meant it. You defended me. No one's really done that before. Something shifted in Dominic's expression, a flicker of something deeper than their arrangement called for. Before either could analyze it, Penelope rushed over, radiant in a white sundress, despite the winter weather. Viv, Mom told me you brought someone, and I had to see for myself. Her sister hugged her tightly before turning to Dominic with unabashed curiosity. I'm Penelope, the bride, and the reason you're all trapped at this resort for 4 days, Dominic. And I wouldn't call it trapped. The company's been excellent so far. He smiled at Penelope with easy charm, but his hand never left Vivian's waist. The brunch continued with a whirlwind of introductions, family stories, and knowing looks from relatives who clearly thought Vivian had finally settled down. Through it all, Dominic played his part flawlessly, attentive, but not smothering, charming but not fake, protective, but not possessive. It wasn't until later that afternoon, when they retreated to the resort's library under the guise of needing quiet time, that the carefully maintained facade began to crack. The library was deserted, filled with leather chairs and the smell of old books. Snow fell steadily outside the tall windows. Vivian collapsed into a chair with an exhausted sigh. I owe you hazard pay for that performance, she said. My aunt asked when we're getting married. Dominic laughed, loosening his tie and settling into the chair across from her. Your uncle asked if I'd gotten you pregnant yet. Apparently, that's the only reason people date in your family. Welcome to the Hart family inquisition. We should have included a clause about invasive personal questions in our contract. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the tension of the performance slowly ebbing away. Outside, the afternoon light was fading into that peculiar blue-gray of winter twilight. Can I ask you something? Vivian said quietly. And you can tell me it's none of my business, if you want. Dominic's expression became guarded, but he nodded. Go ahead, your ex-fiancé. The one you're avoiding. What happened? He was quiet for so long that Vivian thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was stripped of its usual confident tone. Her name was Catherine. We met in business school, dated for 3 years, got engaged on Christmas Eve 5 years ago. The wedding was supposed to be the social event of the season. Her families connected. Mine had money. It should have been perfect. He paused, staring at the snow. The morning of the wedding, I got a call. My younger brother had been in an accident, critical condition. I told Catherine we needed to postpone just a few weeks until I knew he was going to be okay. Vivian's heart clenched, and she said no. She said the deposits were non-refundable, that we'd already inconvenienced everyone, that my brother had always been dramatic and he'd be fine. Dominic's jaw tightened. I left to be with my brother anyway. She went through with the ceremony, married her backup date, a groomsman who'd apparently been waiting in the wings. My brother recovered, thankfully, but I learned something important that day about what matters and what doesn't. I'm so sorry, Vivian said softly, moving to sit on the arm of his chair. Without thinking, she placed her hand on his shoulder. Your brother, he's okay now. He's great. Getting married next year, actually, to someone who would burn down a cathedral before missing his worst day. Dominic looked up at her, something vulnerable and raw in his expression. That's what I want, Vivian. Someone who chooses me when it's inconvenient, when it's messy, when it costs something. I've spent 2 years building walls to make sure I never need that again. And then you crashed into my carefully controlled life. The air between them felt charged with something dangerous. Vivian's hand trembled slightly on his shoulder. I understand walls, she admitted quietly. After Julian, after years of watching my career success make men feel threatened or irrelevant, I built my own fortress. It's easier to be alone than to be disappointed. Is it though? Dominic asked, his hand coming up to cover hers. Easier, I mean, because I've been telling myself that for 2 years, and I'm starting to think it's just another kind of prison. Vivian felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. We're quite a pair, aren't we? To people so terrified of being hurt that we'd rather fake a relationship than risk a real one. What if we didn't have to? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and danger. Before Vivian could respond, the library door burst open and Penelope rushed in, her expression frantic. Viv, I need you. Wedding emergency. The florist mixed up the orders and Mum's having a meltdown, and the wedding planner quit via email, and I can't. Her sister's voice broke. Vivian immediately shifted into crisis management mode, standing and pulling Penelope into a hug. Hey, breathe. It's okay. We'll fix it. We. Penelope sniffled. We. Dominic confirmed, standing as well. I didn't fund 100 startups without learning crisis management. What's the biggest problem? For the next 4 hours, the three of them worked together, Vivian using her architectural precision to reorganize the flower arrangements, Dominic leveraging his business connections to find a replacement coordinator, and Penelope gradually calming down as solutions emerged. By the time they finished, it was nearly midnight. They stood in the resort's empty event hall, surrounded by rescued centerpieces and revised seating charts. Exhausted, but triumphant. You two are miracle workers, Penelope said, hugging them both. I don't know what I would have done without you. She paused, looking between them with a knowing smile. You know, when Mom said Viv was bringing someone, I thought it was another one of her optimization projects, someone impressive on paper, but hollow in reality. But you too, you're the real thing. After Penelope left, Vivian and Dominic walked slowly back toward their separate rooms. The hallway was quiet, lit only by dim sconces that cast warm shadows. Thank you, Vivian said as they reached her door. For tonight, for helping with Penelope. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Dominic said simply, because it mattered to you. And somewhere in the last 24 hours, things that matter to you started mattering to me. They stood in the hallway, close enough that Vivian could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Every instinct screamed at her to maintain distance, to remember the contract, to protect herself. Instead, she reached up and touched his face gently. Dominic, I think we're in trouble. I know, he whispered, leaning into her touch. We broke the cardinal rule. We forgot this was supposed to be fake. Neither moved, neither pulled away. They simply stood there in the quiet hallway, acknowledging the beautiful, terrifying truth that their carefully constructed arrangement was crumbling around them, and neither was sure they wanted to stop it. Christmas Eve morning arrived with fresh snow and mounting tension. Vivian woke early, her mind racing through everything that had shifted between her and Dominic. The wedding rehearsal was scheduled for 11, followed by the rehearsal dinner, and then finally, the Christmas Eve ceremony itself. She found Dominic already in the hotel restaurant, nursing black coffee and staring out at the snow-covered landscape with an expression she couldn't quite read. Couldn't sleep either, she asked, sliding into the chair across from him, kept thinking about contracts and clauses. He admitted with a wry smile, specifically about how many we've already violated. Before Vivian could respond, her phone buzzed. It was a message from her assistant. Emergency with the Riverside project. Client threatening to pull out. Need you to call immediately. The Riverside project was her firm's biggest commissioner sustainable housing development that represented everything her career had been building toward. She felt the familiar pull of obligation, the instinct to put work first that had governed her life for years. Dominic noticed her expression change. Work, major crisis. She stood, already calculating how quickly she could handle the call. Vivian. His voice stopped her. What would you tell me to do if it were my crisis? She sat back down slowly, understanding his point. I'd tell you that some things are more important than work. And is today one of those days? Vivian looked at her phone, then at Dominic, then out at the snow. She thought about Catherine, about choosing deposits over emergencies, about all the times she'd prioritized her career over her own life. She typed a response to her assistant. Handle it. That's what I pay you for. I'm with my family. Dominic's smile was worth more than any commission. The rehearsal went smoothly until the end, when the wedding coordinator asked couples to practice the processional. Vivian found herself walking down the aisle with Dominic's arm linked through hers, and the symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. This feels dangerous, she whispered as they reached the altar. Terrifying, he agreed. But maybe the best things usually are. The rehearsal dinner that evening was held in the resort's grand ballroom, decorated with thousands of white lights and winter greenery. Vivian wore a deep blue dress that made Dominic's eyes darken when he first saw her. You're staring, she said as they took their seats at the family table. I'm allowed to stare at my girlfriend, he replied, the word girlfriend carrying weight that had nothing to do with their arrangement. Midway through dinner, Penelope stood to give a toast. I want to thank everyone for being here, for celebrating with us during this magical season, and I want to especially thank my sister Vivian. She looked directly at Vivian, her eyes shining. Viv, you've always been the strong one, the successful one, the one who had everything figured out. But this week, I've watched you be something even better happy. Dominic, thank you for making my sister remember what joy looks like. The table erupted in applause, and Vivian felt tears threatening. Across the table, her mother was crying openly, and even her usually stoic father was smiling warmly. After dinner, as people mingled and the music played, Julian approached Vivian while Dominic was getting drinks. I owe you an apology, Julian said stiffly, for how things ended between us. I was a coward. Yes, you were, Vivian agreed calmly. But I'm grateful now. You leaving made space for something real. He's good for you, Julian admitted, glancing at where Dominic stood chatting with Vivian's father. He looks at you like you're the only person in the room. After Julian left, Vivian found herself on the balcony, needing air and space to process everything. The snow had stopped, and the night was clear and cold, with stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds. Dominic found her there a few minutes later, draping his jacket over her shoulders. You'll freeze out here. I'm trying to figure out what's real and what's performance, she admitted. Everything feels so tangled up. Then let me untangle it for you. Dominic turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her arms. What I feel for you is real, Vivian. Completely, terrifyingly real. Somewhere between the grocery store collision we invented and the flower crisis we actually solved, I fell for you. The brilliant architect who builds walls to protect herself. The woman who chooses family over career. The person who makes me want to be brave again. Our contractor screw the contract, he said fiercely. I've spent 2 years following contracts and protecting myself, and I've never been more miserable. You asked me what mattered, and this is it. You matter. We matter. Vivian felt something break open in her chest, a wall she'd spent years reinforcing finally crumbling. I'm terrified, she whispered. So am I, Dominic admitted. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe without you. What if we crash and burn? What if this is just holiday magic and it falls apart in the real world, then we'll have tried, he said simply. And trying is better than wondering. Vivian looked up at this man who had entered her life as a convenience and become something essential. She thought about all her carefully laid plans, her protective walls, her fear of losing control. And then she stopped thinking entirely and kissed him. It was nothing like the professional kiss they'd practiced. This was raw, honest, desperate, a confession written in touch and breath. Dominic's arms wrapped around her, pulling her close as if he'd been waiting his entire life for this moment. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Vivian started laughing. "We're terrible at following contracts. The worst," Dominic agreed, kissing her again. They returned to the party hand in hand, no longer performing but simply being. The difference was palpable. Vivian's mother pulled her aside as the evening wound down. "That man loves you," Margaret said simply. "Really loves you. Don't let fear steal that from you, darling. I've watched you build an impressive life, but life without love is just existence. When did you become so wise?" Vivian asked, hugging her mother. "I've always been wise. You just started listening." The Christmas Eve ceremony the next day was beautiful. Penelope radiant, the decorations perfect thanks to their crisis management, and the love between the bride and groom evident in every glance. But Vivian barely noticed the details. She was too busy holding Dominic's hand, too busy imagining her own future, too busy feeling grateful for grocery store collisions and desperate agreements. After the ceremony, as guests mingled during cocktail hour, Catherine appeared. She was objectively beautiful, impeccably dressed, and accompanied by her husband. Dominic tensed beside Vivian. "Hello, Dominic," Catherine said coolly. "I heard you were here." "Catherine." His voice was neutral, but his hand tightened on Vivian's. Catherine's gaze swept over Vivian with clinical assessment. "This must be your guest. How nice for you. This is Vivian Hart, my girlfriend," Dominic said firmly. "Vivian, this is Catherine Morrison and her husband Blake. It's lovely to meet you both," Vivian said with genuine warmth, refusing to be intimidated. "Thank you for your investment in my sister's husband's company. It means a lot to their family." The kindness seemed to disarm Catherine slightly. There was an awkward pause before Blake said, "We should find our table. Congratulations on moving forward, Dominic. You seem happy." After they left, Dominic exhaled slowly. "Well, that was less catastrophic than expected. You survived," Vivian teased. "Was it as terrifying as you thought?" "No," he admitted, "because you were there, and I realized something. She has no power over me anymore. The only person who has power over my heart now is you." As midnight approached and Christmas Day officially began, they found themselves alone on the same balcony where they'd confessed their feelings the night before. The contract's end date had arrived. "Technically," Dominic said, checking his watch, "our arrangement ends in about 30 seconds. "Technically," Vivian agreed, moving closer to him. "So we should probably discuss renewal terms. I'm thinking lifetime agreement, non-negotiable." "That's quite a commitment." "I'm quite sure," Vivian said, looking up at him. "I spent my whole life building walls and playing it safe. And then you crashed into my life and made me remember what it feels like to be brave. I love you, Dominic Ashford. Completely, terrifyingly, magnificently love you." As the clock struck midnight and Christmas bells began to chime somewhere in the distance, Dominic pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a simple, elegant ring. "I bought this yesterday," he admitted. "I was terrified it was too soon, too reckless, to everything we said we wouldn't do. But then I realized that the best things in life usually are." "Vivian Hart, will you marry me? For real this time, no contract, no end date. Just us figuring it out together." Vivian laughed through her tears, kissing him fiercely before pulling back to answer, "Yes, 1,000 times yes," as he slid the ring onto her finger. Snow began to fall again, soft and gentle in the Christmas night. Inside, the wedding reception continued, but out on that balcony, Vivian and Dominic created their own celebration to people who had tried to fake love only to discover the real thing. "Merry Christmas, Dominic whispered against her lips, "Merry Christmas." Vivian replied, holding tight to the man she'd almost been too afraid to love. 6 months later, they stood in that same conservatory where they'd first performed their relationship. But this time, it was their own wedding. Penelope was her maid of honor. Dominic's brother was his best man. And as they exchanged vows, Vivian couldn't help but think about the desperate woman in a hotel bar who had agreed to a 4-day contract. That woman would never have believed that fate could become forever, that fear could transform into courage, or that the best things in life often begin with the worst ideas. But as Dominic kissed her and their families cheered, Vivian knew one thing for certain. Sometimes the greatest gift Christmas can give you isn't what you wished for, but what you never knew you needed.